Hey guys, as you know, I make a lot of videos of me installing and reviewing various Linux distros on this channel. I've probably installed and reviewed 40, maybe 50 Linux distros on this channel in the couple of months it's been up. And the only way to really install and review that many different operating systems is to do it in virtual machines. Otherwise, you would be wiping out the hard drive on your computer constantly trying out different distros. So the easy way to try out pretty much any Linux distro is just to install it in a virtual machine. The virtualization program I like to use is Virtualbox, and a lot of you users know I use Virtualbox and have asked me about what settings I use inside Virtualbox, how do you get Virtualbox set up. So I thought I'd go over a little bit of that on this video today. Okay, before we get started, with Virtualbox, we need to discuss what exactly is a virtual machine. When we talk about virtual machines or virtualization, what do we mean? We mean running an operating system installed on software which imitates running it on dedicated hardware. So what does that mean? It means I'm running the Ubuntu LTS on this computer right now. Say I want to try out Arch Linux. Well, without virtualization, what I would have to do is I would have to reformat the hard drive on this computer, wipe out Ubuntu, install Arch Linux, just to try it out. Either that or do some partitioning and dual boot alongside Ubuntu, have Ubuntu and Arch both installed on the machine, but then again, just to try out Arch Linux. I mean, do you really want to mess around with your drive like that? No. How do you test out an operating system without, running it on your dedicated hardware, without, fooling with all that stuff? Well, you do it through virtualization. You do it in a virtual machine. A program like Virtualbox, for example. You install an operating system inside Virtualbox. It runs on my monitor here. It'll look like we're actually running Arch Linux on dedicated hardware. It will function just as it would, for the most part, if you were running it on dedicated hardware. But you haven't wiped out your main machine. You haven't really done any major changes to your existing system. When I'm done, say, testing out Arch Linux, I want to just delete that virtual machine. It's gone. So it's a good way to test out operating systems. That's what a lot of desktop users use it for, is just to test operating systems out. It's a good way for new Linux users in particular to test things out, because a lot of new Linux users are scared to just jump into Linux, especially if you're coming from Windows, all you've ever known is Windows, and you're not really tech savvy. You think Linux is kind of scary. You don't want to just jump into it. You think it's going to be difficult. Well, you can test things out in a program like Virtualbox. You can set up a virtual machine, run through the install of Ubuntu, for example, and see how easy that install is. As a matter of fact, because it's a virtual machine, you can do it a dozen times. You can run through that install of Ubuntu several times before you actually do it on physical hardware. So it's a good way for new Linux users to get comfortable using Linux, installing Linux in particular, but also living in Linux. You could live inside Linux inside a virtual machine. You could install Virtualbox on your Windows computer, install Ubuntu or Mint or Elementary, some user-friendly Linux distro, inside Virtualbox, and run that on top of your Windows install, for a few weeks, just to see how you like it. Alright, I mentioned Virtualbox on Windows. Yes, Virtualbox is available on Windows. It's available on Mac. They have packages for pretty much every Linux distribution out there. So, and Solaris too. So even some Unix, distros have packages for Virtualbox. So you can get Virtualbox up and running on any operating system out there. They have builds. Let me see. They already have builds available for many of the Ubuntu releases. Debian 7, 8, and 9, SUSE 13.2, Fedora 26 and 27, also Fedora 25, and of course Oracle Linux. Oracle is the company behind Virtualbox too, so that makes sense. You can pull it down and build it from source. I know Ubuntu has a PPA for Virtualbox. I'm sure it's available in Arch too. I'm sure Arch has packages, Gentoo as well. So let me launch VirtualBox here. Alright, now when you first launch VirtualBox, it will not look exactly like mine. It will look very similar, but all these virtual machines that I already have created in this left-hand column, of course, won't exist on your machine. This will just be an empty column. So later this afternoon, I'm going to record another Linux distro install and review. So I'm going to show you the settings I choose pretty much every time I install a Linux distro. So I go up here to New. We're going to create a new virtual machine. And I click New. The first thing VirtualBox is going to ask us is what kind of operating system are we installing. Now what I'm installing later is called Endless OS. VirtualBox, if it knows about this Linux distro, it will automatically choose Linux here for the operating system type, and it will choose whatever Linux distro this particular Linux distro is based on. Endless OS is a new Linux distro. VirtualBox doesn't know about it, so I actually have to manually set type Linux and then version. Endless OS is a Debian based distro, so I'm going to choose Debian 64-bit here, and I'm going to choose Next. Then VirtualBox asks how much memory we want to give the virtual machine. I have 16 gigs of RAM on my main machine, and I have that much RAM mainly for virtualization. When you have that much RAM on your machine, you can give half of your RAM to a virtual machine if you want. So I could give, 8 gigs to this virtual machine, no problem, and still have 8 gigs, which is plenty of RAM for my main machine. So I'm going to give it, I don't know, somewhere around 6 gigs is usually what I give these virtual machines. Alright, then it's going to ask creating a hard disk. This is a virtual hard drive. Usually I just go with the default, which it's always ticked on. Create a virtual hard disk now. Yes. So I create that. Then it asks what type of hard disk is it going to create. By default, it has VDI selected, VirtualBox disk image. So this is a file that ends in .vdi. I always leave that ticked on by default too. But it has other options. VMDK, VHD, HDD, QED, and QCOW. Now some of these other hard disk file types you would choose, for example, like the HDD is the Parallels hard disk for those that run Parallels in the Mac operating system. So you might choose that to be compatible with Parallels. Same thing with QED, that's the QEMU disk type. So if you also run QEMU, you might do that, but I only live in VirtualBox, so I always just choose the default VirtualBox disk image, VDI. Alright, the next thing it asks us, storage on physical hard disks. Do you want to dynamically allocate it or create a fixed size? I always choose dynamically allocate it. It's chosen by default. What this does is our hard drive, our virtual hard drive, I'm going to create like a 20 gig hard drive probably on this virtual machine I'm setting up right now. Do we want that virtual hard drive to actually take up 20 gigs of space on my hard disk? What if the operating system I install on that 20 gig hard drive only takes up 5 gigs? Well, choose dynamically allocate space, and then it only takes up 5 gigs of hard disk space on my real machine, even though I created a 20 gig virtual machine. So I always choose dynamically allocate. Alright, file size, file location and size. Here is where you set the virtual disk size. So by default it always chooses 8 gigs on any Linux distro. That's just VirtualBox's go-to. It always wants to create an 8 gig virtual hard drive. 8 gigs is fine for the majority of Linux distros out there, but for some it's not going to be enough space. And the one I'm reviewing today, I know it's not going to be enough space because it comes with a ton of software preloaded on it. The ISO for Endless OS, which I'll review later today, is almost 15 gigs in size. Gigantic. So it has a ton of stuff on it. So I am going to actually create, you know what, I'll create a 25 gig hard drive on this just to be safe. Alright, I hit create, and that's it. Now, in this list here, you see Endless OS here. Let me move it up the list here. Alright, so Endless OS, and it says powered off. That means it's not running. You know, we've never opened it. Even if I did open it right now, I mean, we didn't download an ISO or attach an ISO to it, so nothing would happen if I tried to open this right now. What I need to do is I need to change some of the settings in it. Now, you can do that with it highlighted. You can go up here to Settings. Let me close that window, or you can right-click and go to Settings. Either one opens up this Settings menu here. Alright, to get a Linux operating system to function correctly in VirtualBox, there's a few things that you really need to tick on. The most important one is under Display. Under Display, you have the option of enabling 3D acceleration, enabling 2D acceleration. You need to tick on Enable 3D acceleration for most of these Linux distros to work. So that's just automatic. I just know that every time I create one of these virtual machines, I just automatically go to Settings, go to Display, tick on 3D acceleration. Now, for those of you on multi-monitor systems, I use a 3-monitor system. If I wanted to do a 3-monitor setup in this virtual machine, I would also adjust the monitor count. By default, it's always set to 1. I can, you know, tick that up to 2 or to 3 monitors. It won't let me go past that because I don't have more. Well, actually it will, but I don't have enough monitors really to do an 8-monitor setup here. But I could tick that up to 3 monitors and get a proper, you know, 3-monitor setup on this virtual machine. I'm just going to leave it as 1. I always just record 1 screen on my videos. Asked about video memory. How much video memory do we want to give it? I have the option of doing 1 megabyte all the way up to 128. Just for purposes of this video, I'll adjust it a little bit. I'll just give it 64 megs of video memory. That's really all I would do under Display. The main thing you would want to adjust, though, the only thing you really need to adjust in Display is you've got to tick on Enable 3D acceleration. Alright, back up the list here. System. System, we have options for motherboard, processor, and acceleration. I would never mess with the motherboard or acceleration options, but I do often go to processor here. If you have multiple cores on your CPU, by default, VirtualBox is only giving your virtual machine 1 CPU. If you want to give it more, this is where you do it. So I have a 6-core processor. I'm going to give this virtual machine 2 cores. Just to be nice, you know, just so it runs better. Alright. Then under storage here, this is where we need to add our ISO, you know, to actually boot up into a live environment, get to an installer. So under Controller IDE here, we have this little disk symbol with a plus sign. I'm going to click on it. Now VirtualBox asks us to choose disk, and then wherever you downloaded the ISO, it's in my downloads folder. I have EOS. This is their ISO here. We just click that, and now you see EOS here under Controller IDE. And that's really all I need to do. I click OK, and now when I double click EOS here, there you go. It's booting into the ISO. Now I'm going to close this out because I'm really not ready to install this and review that particular operating system just yet. But that's what you need to do. Some other more advanced settings. Let me open up a virtual machine I already have set up. So let me open up, I've got Sabian installed on this system. Let me go to settings here. Let me see what I've got it set to. So I've got the monitor count set to 3. I'm going to adjust that to just 1 monitor. I don't want to open up 3 monitors, you know, for this video here. Anyway, let me open up Sabian. Okay, by default, I've got Sabian opening full screen. Now, if I want to get out of full screen Sabian, Control F takes me out of full screen. So Control F toggles full screen on and off. Now, if you're actually wanting to live inside a virtual machine for a while, you know, get rid of all the bars at the top, get rid of my Tent 2 panel here on my main machine, you know, you want full screen experience. You basically don't want to see your main operating system. All you want to see is the virtual machine you're in. Control F gets you that full screen mode, just like you're actually living in Sabian. When you guys first launch your virtual machines, you'll have some VirtualBox menus. You know, in this top panel, you'll also have a menu of sorts at the bottom, a little sys tray. Where that is located, if I go back to Sabian here, which is, it says is running, you know, so the virtual machine is running, I right click and choose settings again. We have user interface here. Now I've got this ticked off, but by default this is ticked on. Let me tick that on, and by default this bottom one is also ticked on. If I click OK now and go back to the virtual machine, you see now I have my menus here in VirtualBox. And at the bottom, you know, I've got a little sys tray down here. But I rarely need to access this menu here at the top when I've got a virtual machine set up properly, and I never really need any of this at the bottom. So I always get rid of all that stuff, especially on my videos. You guys don't want to see, you know, the VirtualBox menus. You really don't want to see the open box window frame either. I get rid of all that stuff, so all you guys see is the desktop environment I'm reviewing. So let me go back and set those settings. So user interface, and I tick this off, and then I tick this off. I click OK, and just like that, the menu at the top is gone, the little system icons at the bottom are gone. If I wanted to get rid of the frame here at the top, I'm in open box today. This is an open box feature, but if I right click on the frame on open box, I can choose undecorate. That frame is gone. Now when I log in to Sabian, the resolution is a little bit off here, but well, I know why the wallpaper here looks all scrunched up. I actually had this set up for a 3-monitor system. I live in Sabian sometimes, so I have it set up to use all 3 of my monitors. Remember, we adjusted it to just use 1 monitor this time, so this 3-monitor wallpaper looks really bad. Now let's briefly discuss how to get the VirtualBox guest editions working in case the distro you install, they don't just automatically work. Oftentimes they do, particularly on Ubuntu based systems, and a lot of times in Arch based systems too. I've noticed the VirtualBox guest editions, they just work, but sometimes they don't. How do you get them to work? Well, let me open up a virtual machine here. Let me get out of full screen mode, again Control F, and I'm going to load into Antergos. I'll probably need to load into this anyway. It's been a couple of days since I've loaded up Antergos here, and I probably need to run an update. Alright, so this is Antergos. I'm running the Cinnamon desktop environment. Obviously the VirtualBox guest editions are already set up and working on this machine. I actually reviewed this particular install of Antergos like 2 months ago. But say they weren't working, how do you get them to work? Well, you go up here, again by default this menu is going to be at the top here. This is the VirtualBox menu, File, Machine, View, Input, Devices, and Help. You want to go to Devices, and at the very bottom of the menu you have Insert Guest Editions CD Image. You hit that, and it's asking me do I want to unmount the VirtualBox guest editions, because I've already got them installed and mounted. But on a lot of distros it's going to have a pop-up asking you, do you want to auto run that program? You want to choose yes, and for those distros that do that, usually you reboot the machine, you have a proper screen resolution. For those distros that don't have that pop-up where you automatically run the guest editions, after you click Insert Guest Editions, you need to go to your File Manager. And in the left-hand column of your File Manager here, you will have VirtualBox Editions here. You click on that. Inside this folder, you will have VBox Linux Editions.run. You need to run that program inside a terminal, usually. So run that in a terminal. You might have to give it sudo privileges, and you might have to do like sudo space sh space VBox Linux Editions.run. So sudo and then sh for shell and then VBox Linux Editions.run, and it should run the installation of the guest editions inside a terminal. Once you're done, again, reboot the machine. Hopefully they work. Anyway, I'm going to start an update here on Antergos. There's a few packages that need to be updated, but Anyway, since I've got this in a windowed mode here, I can just minimize that. Come back to my VirtualBox here. Again, Antergos is running, while I've got it minimized. So I've got an instance of Antergos taking 2 cores of my CPU and 6 gigs of my RAM running. I could actually put this on my second monitor over here and just have that running and then living in my main machine on this monitor. Matter of fact, let me do that. I'm going to drag this over. You guys didn't see it, but Antergos is running over here. I want to briefly mention moving files from your main machine to a virtual machine. A lot of folks want to know how to do that. You can do that. What you do is, say this Manjaro that's not running right here. The Manjaro virtual machine, I go to settings again. And where we had system, display, storage, all that before, near the bottom you have shared folders. Here you can set up a folder to share on your main machine with the virtual machine. It creates a little connection. You give it permission to access a specific folder on your main machine to your virtual machine. Say, you want to play all your music on your main machine inside a virtual machine. You just link to your music folder from one machine to the next. So that's one way to do it. These days I really don't play with the shared folder feature much on VirtualBox. I mean, it works, but a lot of times I just SSH into my machine to access anything I need to, or scopy, SCP, and then just pull down everything I need from my main machine. How does that work? Well, let me show you. So I'm going to use the secure shell copy command to pull files from a remote machine. In this case, my main machine is the remote machine. I'm inside a virtual machine right now. This is Salient OS inside a virtual machine. I want to pull, say, all my wallpapers down from my main machine to this machine. How do you do it? Well, you can do it just using SSH. You connect to a remote machine that you have access to, and then you have access to the file system on that machine. I'm just going to copy files from that machine to this virtual machine. I know this really isn't VirtualBox specific. I mean, this is really more a video here on SSH, but here's how you do it. You need sudo permission. Actually, you don't need sudo permission, do you? I think you do. Anyway, sudo scp, and then I need to give it a recursive flag, -r, and then your username on the remote machine. My username on my remote machine, which is my physical machine, is Derek, and then the IP, Derek at, in my case, 10.0.0.6, then a colon, then the location of the files I want to pull down, which are my wallpapers, which I have located in a folder called backgrounds, then space, and then the location of where we want to put them on this machine, the virtual machine, which I'm going to put them in my downloads folder. That's a little complicated, but anyway, I just wanted to show you how easy it is with SCP to pull down these files. Alright, then we need the password on the remote machine we're pulling these files from, so this is the password on my physical machine. Alright, and since I had the password for the remote machine, I'm allowed to pull these files down. So now you can see in the terminal it's downloading all these files from the remote machine and putting them on this virtual machine here. If I go to the downloads folder, which is where I told it to put all these files, you see I have a folder in there called backgrounds. That's the backgrounds folder from my physical machine that it pulled down. All the files that were in there were also pulled down, or are in the process of being pulled down. So the scp command is a very cool command. It's once you know how to use that command, it's so much quicker to do that, to move files around in between your physical machine and virtual machines, or multiple physical machines. Say, your desktop, your laptop, or your personal computer, and then that family computer. You need to move stuff around. Yes, you can carry a thumb drive over there and do it. In VirtualBox, you have the option of doing shared folders, but really doing it through the secure shell makes a lot of sense. So it's worth learning that particular command, guys. Anyway, this was a kind of a long video, and I actually meant for it to be just a quick, brief overview of VirtualBox, how I use it, and I just barely scratched the surface on VirtualBox. There's a ton of features for VirtualBox. Many of them I don't know. You can get into some really advanced stuff using virtualization, but for what I use it for, just testing out distros and for making these videos, and that's what I recommend you guys, you desktop Linux users that want to test out other Linux distros, check out VirtualBox. Peace, guys.